February 14th, 1977, Valentine's Day. The Bayfront Center Arena in St. Petersburg, Florida, was packed with 12,000 fans who'd come to see Elvis Presley perform. It was one of dozens of concerts Elvis would do that year, part of the relentless touring schedule that was slowly killing him. He was exhausted, over-medicated, and struggling to maintain the energy and vocal power that had once seemed limitless. Elvis had already performed for 45 minutes, working through his standard set list with varying degrees of success. Some songs had been strong, his voice carrying the familiar power that fans remembered. Other songs had been shaky, his voice cracking or fading, obvious signs that something was wrong. But the audience, devoted Elvis fans who'd loved him for decades, cheered anyway, willing to overlook the imperfections. Then Elvis began the spoken word section of You Lonesome Tonight, the part where he recited the romantic monologue that had made the song one of his most beloved performances. This was usually a highlight of his shows, a moment of intimacy where Elvis connected directly with the audience, speaking the words with emotion and vulnerability. But on this night, something happened that had never happened before in Elvis's entire career. His voice disappeared. Not gradually, not with a cough or a clearing of the throat. It simply vanished mid-sentence, leaving Elvis standing at the microphone with his mouth moving but no sound coming out. Elvis stopped, touched his throat, tried again. Nothing. Complete silence from a man who'd built his entire life on his voice, on his ability to sing and speak and connect with audiences through sound. The arena went dead quiet. 12,000 people held their breath, watching Elvis Presley stand on stage, clearly distressed, clearly unable to produce any sound at all. The band, unsure what to do, stopped playing. The backup singers stood frozen. Elvis's road manager watched from the wings, calculating whether to end the show, whether to get Elvis off stage before this became a complete disaster. Elvis stood at the microphone, trying desperately to make his voice work. He took a drink of water, cleared his throat, tried again. Still nothing. The prescription drugs he'd taken before the show, combined with weeks of touring without rest, had finally overwhelmed his system. His vocal cords had simply shut down, refusing to produce sound no matter how hard he tried. The silence stretched on. 30 seconds. 45 seconds, a full minute of Elvis Presley unable to sing, unable to speak, standing vulnerable and helpless in front of 12,000 people who'd paid to hear him perform. Then, from the front row, a voice began singing. A woman's voice, not professionally trained, but strong and clear, carrying the melody of "Are You Lonesome Tonight" through the silent arena. Are you lonesome tonight? Do you miss me tonight? Elvis looked down at the source of the voice. A woman in her early 50s, with tears streaming down her face, was singing his song for him. She wasn't trying to take over the performance or show off. She was trying to help, to give Elvis a moment to recover, to keep the song alive when his voice had failed. Her name was Linda Morrison. She was a schoolteacher from Tampa, a lifelong Elvis fan who'd been listening to his music since 1956. She'd come to this concert alone, her husband having passed away 2 years earlier, finding comfort in Elvis's music during her grief. She knew every word of every song, had listened to "Are You Lonesome Tonight" hundreds of times. And now, watching Elvis struggle, watching him stand there unable to perform, she did the only thing she could think of. She sang for him. Elvis, still unable to produce any sound of his own, did something that shocked everyone in the arena. He took the microphone off the stand, walked to the edge of the stage, and held it down toward Linda, gesturing for her to continue. Linda's voice wavered for a moment, overwhelmed by what was happening. But then she steadied herself and kept singing, her voice growing stronger, carrying through the arena's sound system to all 12,000 people. Are you sorry we drifted apart? Does your memory stray to a bright summer day? The audience watched in stunned silence as this ordinary woman sang Elvis's song while Elvis himself stood above her, unable to sing, holding the microphone for her like a stagehand, like someone whose only job was to help her perform. When Linda reached the end of the verse, Elvis motioned for her to come up on stage. Security guards helped her climb up, and suddenly Linda Morrison, a schoolteacher from Tampa, was standing on stage with Elvis Presley in front of 12,000 people. Elvis still couldn't speak, but he gestured to the band to continue playing. He handed Linda the microphone fully now, not just holding it for her, but giving it to her, stepping back to let her finish the song. Linda completed "Are You Lonesome Tonight" with Elvis standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, supporting her as she'd just supported him. When the song ended, the arena erupted in applause. Not just polite applause, but a standing ovation that went on for minutes. Elvis still couldn't speak. His voice was completely gone, a casualty of exhaustion and medication and years of pushing his body beyond its limits. But he could gesture, could communicate through actions what he couldn't say with words. He motioned for Linda to stay on stage. Then he gestured to the band, indicating they should start the next song. "Can't Help Falling in Love," another of his classics, another song Linda knew by heart. Elvis stood beside Linda, and together they sang, though "together" is perhaps not quite right. Linda sang while Elvis mouthed the words silently, his voice still refusing to work. But he swayed with the music, moved his hands expressively, connected with Linda and the audience through presence rather than sound. It was one of the strangest performances in Elvis Presley's career. The king of rock and roll, unable to sing, reduced to pantomime, relying on a middle-aged schoolteacher from Tampa to carry his show. But it was also, in its way, one of the most powerful performances of his life. Because stripped of his voice, unable to hide behind his talent, Elvis was purely vulnerable, purely human, purely grateful. After "Can't Help Falling in Love," Elvis's voice returned slightly, a hoarse whisper that the microphone could barely pick up. He spoke directly to Linda, close to the microphone so the audience could hear. "Thank you," Elvis whispered. "You saved me tonight. What's your name?" "Linda Morrison," she said, her own voice shaking. "Linda Morrison from where?" "Tampa, Florida." Elvis turned to the audience, still whispering, because that's all his damaged voice could manage. "Ladies and gentlemen, Linda Morrison from Tampa, Florida. She just did what none of you paid to see. She rescued Elvis Presley." The audience applauded again, and Linda started to leave the stage, thinking her moment was over. But Elvis stopped her, gesturing for her to stay. "Sing with me," Elvis whispered. "Please, I need help tonight." For the next hour, Linda Morrison shared the stage with Elvis Presley. Sometimes Elvis could sing, his voice working in brief bursts before failing again. When it failed, Linda would step in, carrying the melody while Elvis rested. They sang 4 more songs together: "Love Me Tender," "Blue Suede Shoes," "Jailhouse Rock," and finally, "American Trilogy." The concert became a collaboration between a fading superstar and an ordinary woman who loved his music. The audience watched something unprecedented: Elvis Presley admitting he needed help, accepting that help from a fan, and creating something beautiful from vulnerability and mutual support. Between songs, Elvis talked to Linda, and through her, to the audience. His voice came and went, sometimes strong enough to be heard, sometimes disappearing entirely. But he kept trying, kept connecting. "How long have you been listening to my music?" Elvis asked Linda during one break. "Since 1956, Linda said. "I was 16 years old when I heard Hound Dog for the first time. My parents hated it. I loved it." Elvis smiled. "That's how it's supposed to work. The parents hate it, the kids love it. Did they come around eventually?" "My mother did before she died. She told me she understood why I loved your music, because it made me feel alive." Elvis's eyes filled with tears. "That's all I ever wanted to do. Make people feel alive, feel something real." "You did," Linda said. "You do. Your music saved my life more than once." "How?" Elvis whispered. Linda hesitated, then decided to be honest. "My husband died 2 years ago. Cancer. I was so lost. But your music, it kept me going. Reminded me that life could still be beautiful, that I could still feel joy. You've been rescuing me for 20 years. Tonight, I just returned the favor." The audience could hear all of this through the microphones, and many were crying openly. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was two people having a genuine human moment, sharing vulnerability and gratitude, while 12,000 others witnessed something sacred. When the concert finally ended, Elvis hugged Linda Morrison for a long time on stage, neither of them wanting to break the connection. Then Elvis addressed the audience one final time, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you the show you deserved tonight," Elvis whispered. "My voice gave out. My body gave out. But Linda here, she made sure you still got something worth hearing. I want you all to remember her. Remember that music isn't about perfection. It's about connection, about helping each other, about being human together." The audience gave Elvis and Linda a standing ovation that lasted over 10 minutes. People weren't applauding a great performance in the traditional sense. They were applauding honesty, vulnerability, humanity. Backstage after the show, Elvis's road manager and doctor were panicking. Elvis's voice loss was serious, a sign that his body was failing. They wanted to cancel the rest of the tour, get Elvis to a hospital, force him to rest. But Elvis refused. He did agree to see a doctor, who diagnosed severe vocal strain and prescribed rest and medication. But Elvis insisted on continuing the tour. "I can't let people down," he said. "If my voice goes again, I'll find another Linda to help me." Linda Morrison returned to Tampa the next day, back to her teaching job, back to her ordinary life. But she carried with her the memory of the night she'd sung with Elvis Presley, the night she'd rescued her hero when he needed rescuing. Word of what happened in St. Petersburg spread quickly. Newspapers ran stories about the concert where Elvis lost his voice and a fan saved the show. Some critics used it as evidence that Elvis should retire, that he was too sick to perform. Others saw it as a beautiful moment of vulnerability and connection. Elvis sent Linda flowers and a handwritten note thanking her again. He also sent her tickets to every remaining show on his tour, though she could only attend one more, in Tampa a month later. At that show, Elvis's voice was stronger, and he performed well. But he acknowledged Linda in the audience, thanking her publicly again for her help in St. Petersburg. "Linda Morrison is here tonight," Elvis told the Tampa audience. "She's the woman who showed me that fans aren't just people who pay to see me perform. They're partners, they're friends, they're the reason I do this." Linda waved from her seat, embarrassed but deeply moved. Elvis died 6 months later, on August 16, 1977. When Linda heard the news, she cried for hours, mourning not just a celebrity she admired, but someone she'd briefly known personally, someone who'd thanked her for her devotion in the most profound way possible by allowing her to help him when he was vulnerable. At Elvis's funeral, Linda was invited by Elvis's family, who'd heard the story of the St. Petersburg concert and wanted to honor the woman who'd helped Elvis that night. Linda sat with other special guests, representing all the fans who'd loved Elvis and supported him through the years. The story of Elvis losing his voice and Linda Morrison saving the show became one of the most beloved anecdotes in Elvis lore. It represented something fundamental about Elvis's relationship with his fans. It wasn't one-directional adoration, but a genuine connection, a mutual support system where both sides gave and received. Recordings of the St. Petersburg concert exist in the private collections of fans who bootlegged the show. On those recordings, you can hear the moment Elvis's voice fails, the silence that follows, and Linda's clear, strong voice taking over. You can hear Elvis whispering his gratitude, Linda's emotional responses, and the audience's supportive applause. It's one of the most human moments ever captured of Elvis Presley. Linda Morrison continued teaching in Tampa until her retirement in 1995. She gave occasional interviews about the St. Petersburg concert, but never tried to profit from her connection to Elvis. She kept the flowers he'd sent, the handwritten note, the tickets to subsequent shows, but she never sold them or used them for publicity. Very bad to her. "That night wasn't about me becoming famous," Linda said in a 2007 interview, 30 years after the concert. "It was about helping someone I loved when he needed help. Elvis gave me so much through his music. Being able to give something back, even something small, like singing when his voice failed, that was a gift. The greatest moment of my life. Linda Morrison died in 2018 at age 93. Her obituary mentioned her long teaching career and her family, but it also mentioned the night she sang with Elvis Presley, the night she rescued the king of rock and roll when his voice disappeared. The story reminds us that even the greatest performers are human, that they need help sometimes, that vulnerability isn't weakness, but honesty. Elvis could have had security escort him off stage when his voice failed, could have canceled the show, hidden his inability to perform, protected his image as the invincible superstar. Instead, he did something braver. He admitted he needed help, accepted that help from an ordinary fan, and created a moment of genuine connection that mattered more than any technically perfect performance ever could. The day Elvis's voice disappeared, a fan finished his concert, and in doing so, both of them gave the audience something more valuable than entertainment. They gave them proof that music, at its best, is about community, about mutual support, about being human together in all our imperfection and vulnerability. Linda Morrison sang for Elvis when he couldn't sing for himself, and Elvis, in accepting that help with gratitude instead of shame, showed that true strength isn't about never needing anyone else. It's about being brave enough to let people help you when you do.